From censored files to clear evidence, this is Redacted Realms.
Truong Son, the highest altitude oil pipeline in the world. Vietnam's oil pipeline is a real legend. The Vietnamese surpassed the Americans in foresight when building infrastructure for the petroleum system. And a 5,000 kilometers long pipeline system running from the Vietnam-China border along Truong Son to the southeast region. This is a massive project. It's truly proud that these words are about the Truong Son oil pipeline, built while our country was undergoing war from 1968 to 1975. So why did our country have to build such a long oil pipeline? And in the difficult circumstances full of bombs and bullets, how did we complete it? Let's explore with BHT right after this. Going back to the time before the pipeline was built in 1954. After the defeat at Dien Bien Phu, France was forced to sign the Geneva Agreement to end the war in Vietnam. At this conference, the relevant parties decided to take the 17th parallel as the boundary dividing Vietnam into the north belonged to the Democratic Republic of Vietnam, led by Ho Chi Minh, while the south was the state of Vietnam, held by Emperor Bao Dai, a pro-French government opposing the communist movement. Viet Minh troops in the south would withdraw to the north, while French troops in the north would withdraw to the south. According to the agreement, both regions would conduct general elections to unify the country. And then France would be forced to withdraw from the south. If the general elections had taken place, the votes would certainly have favored Ho Chi Minh over Bao Dai. Instead of that favorable scenario, a country like America couldn't stand idly by, because America believed that if South Vietnam fell to the communists, it would be like a domino effect. A national liberation movement would spread throughout Southeast Asia. Therefore, America conspired, using Ngo Dinh Diem as a stepping stone, to create an anti-communist movement in South Vietnam. Diem, with strong backing from a superpower, quickly regained power from Bao Dai. And of course, Diem betrayed, not allowing the general elections to take place. Under his rule, violence and resentment spread throughout South Vietnam. And the National Liberation Front for South Vietnam was born, immediately backed by the Republic of Vietnam government. After a series of internal upheavals under Ngo Dinh Diem, America lost confidence and decided to directly send troops into combat. At that time, the Democratic Republic of Vietnam government had two tasks, and the struggle to liberate the South from the Saigon government, and of course, supply was an indispensable factor in war. The Democratic Republic of Vietnam Army successfully rebuilt the Ho Chi Minh with the purpose of supplying three main items: food, weapons, ammunition, and petroleum. So why supply petroleum? Of course, so that planes could fly and vehicles could run for supply. Therefore, petroleum can be considered one of the most important things, seen as the lifeblood of the resistance. To transport food, weapons, and planes couldn't. Before the oil pipeline existed, petroleum was usually transported by motor vehicles. However, on the journey from north to south, these vehicles consumed 1/3 of the fuel they carried. Additionally, the vehicles had to return to the north, so the remaining aid fuel was very little. Not to mention, these transport vehicles were large, difficult to hide, so they were always targets of the US Air Force. Many vehicles were destroyed before reaching their destination. Faced with that situation, many measures were proposed. First was pouring gasoline into plastic bags, hiding them in backpacks and transporting them to key points. But this method wasn't very effective, because it required a lot of manpower and each person could only carry 1 kilogram. Not only that, both plastic and backpacks were permeable to gasoline. Many people died from petroleum poisoning. Some people even suffer from burns and scalds. Some people collapsed on the road, their plastic bags bursting open, spilling all over them. This is too much, I had to find another way. Then, the next plan was deployed, which was to take advantage of the stream currents and let the rafts drift. However, this method isn't much more promising either, because it took 2 weeks to get there but was only used for 2 days. And this transportation is equally difficult. Even the number of casualties was more horrific than the plan to transport by that bag. One night transporting 29 aircraft meant sacrificing 30 people. Each aircraft was exchanged for the blood. The supply of oil was becoming increasingly headlong. In April 1968, the demand for support on the oil front was growing day by day. From the cold region of El Saigüen, a telegram was sent to the command of the Democrat. Due to a lack of funds, the vehicles had to cease operations. If supplies were not delivered properly, tens of thousands of soldiers. Now we also know about the northern troops' reinforcement plans into the south. Therefore, the bombing campaigns primarily focused on the Ho Chi Minh Trail, North Vietnam, and the Laos-Cambodia border. From now on, we are forced to find a more efficient and safer method of supplying oil. General von Wittjob, during a trip to the Soviet Union, was provided with 2 sets of oil pipelines, field cable, pipe 10 centimeters, each set up to 100 kilometers long. Although they were brought back to Vietnam, they were only stored in warehouses because their use was not yet known. By the time the battlefield in the south became increasingly tense, along with the growing difficulty of transporting oil, the general suggested that everyone adopt this pipeline.
However, no one agreed, and no one objected, because they thought this might be unrealistic.
Surely they also knew that the Soviet Union and Vietnam were 2 countries with 2 different potentials.
The Soviet Union had an extremely modern air defense system
along with artillery systems, while Vietnam did not. The second point is that the pipelines used by the Soviet Union were also no longer than a few dozen kilometers. At that time, no country had ever installed a pipeline that was thousands of kilometers long like that. The third difficulty was that during the war, the Soviet Union used oil pipelines, which were in service for a very short time.
However, for Vietnam, time can stretch out for months, years, or even entire decades. And the question is whether any pipeline can survive sustainably until the resistance is successful?
After much deliberation, this task was ultimately assigned to the General Logistics Department. The socialist countries also agreed to provide aid to the Democratic Republic. In this, the Soviet Union provided 8 sets of pipes along with many pumps. China provided up to 45 sets of pipes, and Czechoslovakia provided 100. Other Allied countries provided an additional 45 oil pipes. In April 1968, the construction of the oil pipeline system began. This pipeline project started construction from Nahian, stretching 42 kilometers with a code name X42 to Na Uy, Ha 10. In the following months, this oil pipeline continued to be extended from both the north and south directions.
The northern-bound fuel pipeline extends from the Nguyen Vuc Fuel Reserve Depot, now in Thuong Tin, Hanoi, to Nguyen.
The southern pipeline splits into 2 branches, the western Truong Son and the eastern Truong Son. The western Truong Son range starts from Ha 10, passes through the New Dao Pass, crosses the border, reaches central Laos, and continues down.
The Dong Truong Son pipeline passes through Route 10, enters Quang Tri, reaches Hue, and merges with the route from the west at Plakok Kanton. By 1972,
the fuel supply was cut off as the U.S. returned and continuously attacked the seaports in Haiphong and Hanphong. However, with the fortunate assistance of China, oil continued to flow in the north. The pipeline continued to extend from the northern border to the north. By 1973, the southern pipeline was again built along the Cambodian border, connecting to Binh Phuong. By 1975, the final pipeline of the Vietnamese battlefield was officially completed. However, building such a 5,000 kilometers long fuel pipeline was certainly no simple task. The most difficult part was still the road through Mui Dao Pass, where the American Air Force bombed Dane. The aviation unit leveled hundreds of rock masses, forming a 10 kilometers trench to bury pipelines, but bombs and shells still stripped the mountain layer by layer, crushing it into.
Finally, the military had to deceive the enemy by building another pipeline far from the real one,
while making it appear authentic, thereby allowing the actual pipeline to be completed. After the difficulties of this pipeline section, the North Vietnamese army decided not to build a pipeline along the Ho Chi. They decided to run the pipeline to the summit of Peak 911, the highest peak in the western Truong Son range at over 1,000 meters, because certainly no one, not even the Americans, would think of it.
A 3-ton bomber could be transported at such an altitude. There was no precedent like this in history at that time.
However, to build the elevated pipeline, the construction workers had to carry the building materials themselves. Major Nguyen Phuc Mon also emotionally recounted that each pipe weighed 38 to 41 kilograms but required 2 people to lift it up. One person used a rice sack to tie the pipe over their shoulder, the other tied it around their waist to use their hands to hold onto forest trees and carry the pipe up. There were places where the pipes were vertical. Transporting 1 kilometer corresponding to 176 pipes was hauled.
Yet thousands of kilometers like this showed the immense hardship.
At 21:30 on March 14, 1975, gasoline had reached South Vietnam. Major Van Van Hoy never forgot the joy of witnessing fuel-laden convoys entering Saigon. Looking up to see the first war vehicles entering like crabs crawling on hills, both worried and excited. We had just finished preparations, and when our forces arrived, we had fuel to supply. Anyone with a piece of paper requesting fuel.
At Bujia map, convoy after convoy never ran out of fuel.
5.5 million cubic meters of fuel were supplied over 7 years of the Saigon. 600 tons of fuel were supplied during the 1975 spring. During the 55 days and nights of the Ho Chi Minh campaign, 77,000 tons of gasoline and 18,000.
It must be said that this was unprecedented. The country could install such a long and high oil pipeline. Thus, it can be seen that Vietnam is a country that, though small, is resilient and full of thorns. For independence, for freedom, we could accomplish things that even imperialist countries had never done in history.
And to achieve these things, it was thanks to the great sacrifices of the heroes. Those who were always ready to fight to the death for the survival. How truly admirable they are.
Do you feel proud of this fuel pipeline? Please leave comments below to let Did know. Thank you for listening. Goodbye and see you again.
Subscribe to the Ingenuity channel so you don't miss exciting videos.
If this file opened your eyes, subscribe and open the next case.